So here's the benefits of becoming an active listener. You actually understand the other person, sometimes for the first time.
Hello, and welcome to the Rise Again podcast. My name is Dr. PeterKRaisanen, and I'm your host here at the Rise Again podcast. Now, we're on to season 2, and the thing about season 2 that's going to differentiate it from season 1 are the things that I've gone through in my life since we were doing season 1. We have recently fostered and adopted a newborn. I killed my first bull elk with my bow and arrow last fall, and I've gotten into fly fishing, as well as am now the medical director of a men's health and testosterone replacement business. This has all been majorly life-changing for me, and I'm super excited to share some of the journey with you guys through the Rise Again podcast. So I hope you guys get something out of this. If you guys love it, please rate it and review it, share it with your friends. Let's get the stuff out there. We're going to share some amazing guests, and I hope you guys really enjoy season 2 of the Rise Again podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the 77th episode of the Rise Again podcast. I am here with my great friend AzJackMartin, and we dive into active listening today. Active listening is something that you either are or are not doing with the people around you, which will either not enhance, which will just take your relationships down, or it will enhance them greatly. So this has a huge part in every single one of our lives. I really hope you get something out of today's episode. This is going to be a part of AzJackMartin's book on the marriage retreat and just on marriage, essentially how to take your marriage to the next level. So obviously, I'm not speaking about Jack's book specifically. We're going to have an episode on that when it's out. But right now, this is just a big part of his journey in growing in his marriage and in his relationships in his life. So I hope you guys get something out of episode 77 with AzJackMartin.
So Peter, we all know somebody in our life that's a terrible listener. We all have that person. If we start to talk about, all this person ever does is talk. They don't know how to listen. It's kind of frustrating in having a conversation with them. And what's interesting is I was probably more in that camp than most people most of my life until you kind of smacked me in the face that one day. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember that, yeah. I was just as frustrated as you were, actually. And so I was just...
Anyway, thank you, because I owe you a huge debt of gratitude. I've been told countless times, Jack, you're not a very good listener. And the response to that was kind of always, like little, it hurts a little bit, or like, hey, screw you, dude, or whatever that was, right? Maybe I'm just a better talker than you are, or something like that. Like some people are meant to listen, some people are meant to talk, right? There's all these things that you can make up about that if you're not a very good listener. The truth is, like, maybe naturally my personality was one that was given to be more of a talker, right? But I never learned how to listen. It didn't occur to me that listening was something that you learn, something that you practice, is something that you can get really good at, right? So when you think of those kind of people in your life, they're terrible at listening. The impact of that, most people think of listening as, I'm listening to whatever you're saying, but I'm prepping what I'm about to respond with or what I'm about to say. That's how they view listening. So I'm either talking or I'm not talking. It's kind of how they view listening. And when you think about relationships, which is what we're really talking about, in every relationship that matters. So whether it's between you and one of your children, you and a friend, you and your spouse, whatever that is, relationships where it matters, if you can't learn how to truly listen, the relationship can never really go anywhere. It can never blossom into what it can be. In order to get past things that you struggle with, or in order to get over conflict or whatever that is, like if you can't listen, it's just always going to be a fight. It's always going to be a debate. And it's interesting that I think naturally as humans, we have this way of avoiding being wrong or trying to be right. Like that's the most important two things that are naturally in the background, whether we know it or not. We want to be right. We want everyone to agree with us. And we don't want to be wrong. Like those two things, like the avoiding being wrong and trying to be right, are kind of at the forefront of every conversation that we're having, right? Well, think how that works in a relationship that matters. Think about your 13-year-old child. How's that going to work? If you're constantly trying to be right and avoid being wrong, and so are they, like it's not going to work, particularly in a marriage, but this also exists in a friendship, it exists anywhere, right? So learning how to listen and actively listen, like we're going to talk about here, is an incredibly powerful thing. You see it in your role as a doctor, right? So it seems to me that some people are just naturally gifted this way, or maybe they've practiced and they've learned how to be good at it. So like a therapist is really good at listening, and a doctor or a physician is really good at listening. Like if you don't listen, how can you provide the correct diagnosis or the correct treatment for your patients, right? I'm sure you have all kinds of that stuff going on in your life.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, we've all been to the doctor who comes in, asks you 2 questions, has their hand on the doorknob, and is ready to leave, right? 5 minutes later, 3 minutes later. And then you have this full spectrum of, you have the doctors who are so busy and they can't get through all their patients because they're so actively engaged with all their clients' lives. And those are the ones that people really love and end up sticking around with for the rest of their life as long as they can until that doctor goes out of practice. And then they're always just grieving because they're just like, man, I'm never going to find someone like that guy again, But my experience in, just generally in medicine is if I don't listen and I don't actually just try to figure out exactly what the issue is. Like I was giving an example earlier of someone who says, well, they call you and say, I have a headache. What should I take? And sometimes this can be with like even friends or somebody calls you, they don't have an understanding. And I don't hold it against people. They just don't have an understanding of how much goes into it. And this is why doctors get paid to actually help take care of people, because the differentiating factors you're thinking I got to rule out, one, is this person having an aneurysm right now in their head? Like, is there something else going on first? Like, got to rule things out.
Mm-hmm.
I can't offer you a Band-Aid solution. So really that whole, in my profession, yes, asking lots of questions and then tell me more about that specifically. Has this ever happened to you before? What did you do last time? We have this acronym I use called OLD CARTS. And then it's onset, location, duration. How would you characterize it? In your words, you tell me exactly in your own language and your way you talk about it. What does that feel like? What aggravates it? What ameliorates it? What makes it better and worse? Does it radiate or does it go anywhere else? Do you feel it anywhere else in your body? Or when that thing pains you, does it affect you anywhere else? And then the timing and then the severity. You kind of learn that stuff early on in medicine where it's like you've got actually, just to be thorough, you kind of want to go through a lot of questions just to make sure that I'm not missing something. Because in medicine, the major problems are when you miss something that you should have got. Asking a lot of questions to figure out what the actual issue is, because most of the time you find out people really don't know. And even this is in relationships, people don't really know what the issue is. So the more questions you ask, you start to realize that, it's not even about that thing. Like it's about something totally different. We were talking about childhood stuff earlier, right? People can flare up about something. Well, was that a trigger? Like they just got exposed to some triggers that they have from when they were kids. They've never gotten over that. Every time this thing happens, they get triggered. So,
well, it's interesting too that the active part of listening is critical too. Like if you're just asking those questions and you haven't developed some degree of trust there between your client and you as a doctor, are they telling you the truth? Are they telling you the whole truth? You ask them a simple question like, do you use caffeine or alcohol or anything like that? Like, yeah, sometimes, but they do it every day, right? So if you can't listen in a way that you can extract all of that, you can't really diagnose it correctly, right? So you'll find that same thing, in any relationship. For myself, and I'll kind of share this story with everyone. I've been married for 26 years now, but in the beginning, like there's no practicing that you did before. You just get married and you just kind of figure it out as you go, right? So, for me, a person that 2 or 3 years in, clearly had kind of screwed that up. The beauty of the lesson of screwing it up is that you get to figure out how to get it right. I was a terrible listener up until, you kind of smacked me around that one day and said, Jack, you really need to learn how to listen.
And just to give everyone a little bit of background, I was so frustrated because I was dealing with some stuff and I had no one to share it with. And I was stewing on this stuff by myself, trying to figure something out. Well, my buddy Jack calls. I give him like a few sentences and he responds right away with what I called the Jack Manifesto. And he laughs about it now and I laugh about it too, because it was just, but he had something to share and it was a repeat. Like it was almost like hitting repeat. Like I knew what Jack was going to say if I just let him. So I was like, Jack, not only do I not care what you had to say, I don't want to hear it right now. But it was purely out of frustration from my end, like not being heard.
Yep.
And that was the genesis of something here and the deepening of our relationship. I mean, our relationship was already pretty deep, but man, it got really deep after that.
Yeah, you can't really be a friend if you can't be the sounding board that they need you to be when they need it. So in that same feeling or that same experience that you're sharing, that's the same experience that my 15-year-old daughter had when I was always, I know exactly how to fix your problem. Like you just do this, and this, and then it will be solved. Well, that's not what they needed. That's not what she needed at that time. She needed somebody that she could trust, that she could share with, and she didn't need it fixed. She just needed someone to listen to. Same thing that Andrea would deal with. So like we just did one of our marriage retreats 2 weeks ago. And Andrea's sharing stuff that I'm still learning more about her that I didn't know. Even after 26 years of marriage, I'm still like, wow, I didn't know that about you. But the reason why is in the past, when she tried to open up and share something, like she couldn't get to where she has just recently gotten to, because I would stop her with, hey, have you ever thought of this? Like, how about you fix it like this? So even if I'm trying to be helpful, I'm still stopping her from sharing. Typically what she's experienced or what she's shared with me, over the last 3-4 years as we've done these marriage retreats, and how listening has been hugely impactful. Like if you can't actively listen in a marriage retreat, like you're still going to get good things out of it, but it's almost like 10x better if you can listen in this way. Let's get a little bit of context here so that your listeners can understand what active listening really is. I like to give a little bit of credit, first of all, to you. As a doctor, you had that gift and inspired me to learn how to listen. And then you shared Chris Voss's book with me called Never Split the Difference. It's a great read. For those of you who haven't read that book, Chris Voss was a FBI hostage negotiator. And he discovered that if you really learn how to listen to terrorists, then you can solve it, or actually they'll kind of help you solve the issue. And in traditional SWAT team style negotiation doesn't even have to take place at all. So what's interesting is you think about children, like little terrorists, right? And it's that same thing takes place there. If you use this active listening, it's a strategy, but it also helps you learn something about them that you never knew before. And that helps you diagnose, just like you would with the doctor, or helps you create a remedy. But often what ends up happening is you create that remedy together. And we'll do a little role play here in a little bit. Jordan Peterson talks about, he doesn't call it active listening. He speaks of it in a different way. So essentially what Jordan shares is, we're going to take turns here. So first, I'm going to listen to you. And I have to keep listening to you and asking questions until my summary of what you just shared with me is right. So like you share, and then I say, it sounds like this is how you're feeling, and you say you're right. Okay, so if you're like, no, that's not it. Okay, now I have to just keep asking more questions until I understand what you're trying to share to the level where I get it right. Okay, then we can switch roles. Now it's your turn to listen to me and ask questions until you understand where I'm coming from. And then when we both get it right, now that I understand you and you understand me, how can we create a solution moving forward so that we don't have this conflict anymore? So this works with terrorists, it works with children, and it works with any relationship.
Patients,
yeah,
whoever. Yeah,
for
any
sure.
person. Yep.
I will say that for a guy like me who hasn't had a skill of listening most of my life, that it's something that needs to be practiced. So part of the marriage retreat is that, you create goals for the quarter, out of the marriage retreat. For 2 years, my goal was become a great listener to the degree where other people will say you're a good listener. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen for 2 years. It took 2 years before somebody said you're a great listener. I had to practice a lot. It's a skill.
It's a skill. It's a muscle you flex for sure.
Where people will talk to you for like 20 minutes and they'll say, Peter's a great listener. Right? So it took me 2 years to get to where the first person even said it. And it wasn't my wife. She still thinks there's room for improvement. But that's kind of classic husband and wife. The man's always a construction project. We always need improvement, right? But we break that down into, things that you do every week. So part of the marriage retreat, when you come out of it, it's like, what am I doing once a week that will take a little bite out of the apple so that, a year from now, I've achieved this goal. And it's a personal thing. It's either around me or it's around her or it's around us or whatever that is, right? So what I was doing is once a week, active listening with one of my children. I'd take them out on a daddy dude night or whatever and practice active listening, which was amazing. Got to know my kids in a way that I never thought, is unbelievable.
You've shared some stories and it's mind blowing how awesome that is.
With Shania, it was just like life changing, right? And then once a week with my wife too, right? So we go on date night, and on the way there, I'm active listening. And she knows that I'm doing it, but she loves it. Now that she's like, okay, I got the floor. He's not going to say anything. He's not going to stop me. He's just going to explore whatever I want to talk about further. Like that's where you really start to get to know who you're married to. And that's also when there's this trust that begins to grow. It's unbelievable. If you haven't experienced it, it's hard to articulate what it feels like. What's amazing too is like we go on date night all the time, right? But it wasn't like that. I would venture to say that the last 3 years of date nights for Andrea have been the best series of dates that she's ever been on with me, because finally I'm listening to her.
That's a big part of a date, right? It's for both of you, and are you getting the most out of it? Something that I thought about too, in relationship to listening, one of my doctor mentors used to say that if you listen to the patient, if you listen to them, they'll tell you what the problem is. And if you listen long enough, they'll tell you what the solution is too.
Yeah.
That one right there, like I used to think about that because I would sit with him in the office, and this was at True North Health Center. This was Dr. Michael Clapper. We'd sit in the office and he would have a patient come in and he goes, when you're with a patient, he goes, you're in total yin mode. Yin. He goes, you are just receiving. You are just quiet. You are calm. You are relaxed. You are open. You are inviting. That's it. Until you have all the information you need and you've done your diagnosis, when you're still doing your physical exam, you're still in yin mode because they might even open up more as you're looking and discovering things. And then once you finally come to the end of the visit, the last 10 minutes of the hour visit or whatever, that's when you're in yang mode. Like you're on, like it's now your time to be active and fire. Now you've got a target and you need to hit it. Okay. So I credit some of that to him. And it was interesting because he was a medical doctor, probably one of the first I'd ever worked with who was really engaged in listening to people's experiences. And I was like, wow, this is very unique. Like in school with counseling, which is where my world exploded, the whole active listening thing. You know, we talked about that in our first podcast, but that was where reading books on this stuff, like there's books on this. Like it's amazing. And they're clinical books. Like how do you advance the relationship deeper? And like you just read a few pages and be like, man, your mind is blown. Fun quote I had that just came to me just as you were talking about on the date thing, you know, driving to the date. One of my good friends, Rochelle, told me she's a counselor, and then she went back to school for medicine. She said that her quote that she thinks about with whenever you're listening to somebody or like in the therapeutic relationship or just a relationship, quit your job, get on the bus and go fishing. Quit your job, meaning stop, just take your professional hat off for a second. Just be present. Don't have any agenda. Don't have a job agenda. Just quit your job, get on the bus and go fishing.
With them.
Yeah. With them and go fishing.
Yep.
And I just think about that quote. I'm like, man, that's just a beautiful way of putting it. You know, like no agenda. Just go in there and just truly listen to and understand what's going on in that person's circle, in that world.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a couple of things that, like when you shared that if you listen long enough, you'll understand the problem. And if you listen long enough, they'll share the solution. Essentially, like that's the impact of active listening. You know, I would ask people like, who wants to have a great marriage? Raise your hand. Like everybody would raise their hand. Nobody's going to sign up for a crappy one or even an average one. Like who wants an average marriage? No one raises their hand for that, right? But if you started with like, who thinks they know how to listen? Most of the hands would still go up. Mine would have went up. Like I heard, I was there. I heard what was said, but you didn't really hear. You just heard to the degree that you cracked the door open a little bit. Like if you've not participated in active listening to where the doors are wide open and it's just flowing and you don't even have to say anything, including the solution that arises. So one of the funniest things this is a great story with Shania. So early in our struggles with...
This is your oldest daughter.
Yeah,
Shania.
my oldest daughter. Yeah. So she was probably about 16 at the time. And this is kind of post her real struggle with suicide and those kind of things. But she's got a car now and she's got to pay for insurance and she's got to afford gas and like she needs a job, right? So I'm encouraging her to go to get a job, but I'm not pushing her anymore. Like I stopped telling her what to do. I stopped giving her lectures because none of that stuff works. And I started listening to her. So one day, you know, I asked her, I was like, hey, how's it going with your jobs interviews or whatever? And then she started to kind of get upset, you know, like, Dad, like, you know, nobody's hiring. Like she's just kind of going off, right? On the general kind of frustration of not having a job. It's not having money, can't go anywhere. Like her life stopped by her not having a job, right? I had already told her many times, here's how you do it. You go in and you say, let me speak to the manager. And then you go to the next place. You do the same thing. Instead of just showing up online as an applicant, sign up online as an applicant and then go in and talk to the manager and say, hey, I just signed up. I really want to work for you. Right? It's that thing. So and she didn't take that to heart because dad's telling her what to do. So that didn't work. Fast forward 2-3 weeks, we're having this conversation and my wife comes in to the conversation. Like she's standing in the kitchen. She comes into the conversation and starts to kind of tell her what to do. And I had to kind of, give her a little poke like, hey, watch this. Just be quiet. Watch this. So I asked Shania, like, tell me more about her frustration. I started doing the active listening right there. And I wasn't even good at this yet. This is just kind of new to me, right? But I've been practicing it all over the place. I figured let's try it on this simple little thing. And so she started to share how she feels. And then I said, like, how long has this been going on? Just asking these simple questions that essentially just allow her more runway to share. That's what active listening is.
It showed you were genuinely interested.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So like now she's like, oh, okay, wow, this is interesting. He's not telling me how to fix it. He's letting me. This is awesome, right? Well, then she starts to run with it, right? She shares all of the characteristics of her experience with, full color. It's like, okay, now that you have shared that, like, and I said, it sounds like this is what you're experiencing. And then I shared it back and she's like, yeah, that's exactly what it's like out there, Dad. So then I said, this is how it is over here. And I basically, got to take my turn. And so then she's like, oh, okay. So like, what's it like to be a parent when your child is always trying to get them to give you something for free? It was like, she didn't understand that, right? But in that conversation, she was able to see it. So then I'm able to say, now you know how I feel and I know how you feel. What do you think we can do to solve this? What do you think she says? She's like, well, maybe I should just go in and talk to the manager. She basically starts to repeat what I've been telling her for like months. And then she goes and does that. Now it's her idea, right? And she gets a job. And there was no conflict. She didn't feel like she was being told what to do. She felt like it was her idea. It was almost comical for all of us. Even Shania will look back and laugh at that, right? She goes to her bedroom to get her keys because she's going to go talk to the manager at the place that she had like 7 applications. She hadn't talked to them, right? Andrea looks at me and she's got these huge eyeballs. She said, did that just happen? This is the girl that used to fight everything. But that's the power of active listening with a child. It's amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that's an incredible experience. I bet your jaw kind of dropped too with that one. It's like, oh, wow, it was that easy. And I've been, kicking my foot against the pricks for how long trying to make some movement on that side.
Yeah, not only that, I was just figuring it out. Like, I didn't know what I was doing yet. So that my first attempt, the way that I see active listening to kind of keep it really simple and to give something for your listeners to kind of go play with. Step 1 is discovery. All you're really doing is discovery. So you want to learn as much as you can about whatever this is the person is struggling with. We can get silly about this. Let's do a little role play here. Pretend like you like to make the bed one way and I like to make the bed another way. So this is a marriage thing and this is comical, but this is real. Everybody will be able to relate with this, right? So I make the bed and you can't stand it because I don't tuck it in under the pillows or whatever. You make the bed and I'm like, it's totally not military. Doesn't make any sense that you would have wrinkles in it. So when we get in that kind of silly little conflict, like these silly little conflicts show up all the time in a relationship, but they shouldn't. If we stop and I ask you, or I play discovery, it's like, tell me, you say, hey, I can't stand it when you make the bed this way.
I can't stand it when you make the bed this way.
And I say, tell me more.
I guess the way I've always made my beds is I like to have mitered corners. And I can't stand when you don't tuck in the sheets on the side and it doesn't look clean around the edges.
How long has this been going on?
Since day one, honestly. I just kind of finally blew up and I was like, you know what? I just need to let you know how frustrated I am about this whole bed making scenario because I just remake them all the time.
Tell me about the frustration. Like, how does that feel?
I get aggravated. It probably takes me 20 minutes every day of just like letting it go. I think about it, I walk into the bedroom and I think about I look at the bed and I'm like, he hasn't figured this out over all this time. You know what I mean? It's not made the way I like it. I often remake it and he still hasn't learned that this is the way I like to have my bed made.
So that's just a quick example of discovery, right? Just ask them simple questions about, their feelings, the length of time. It's like, these are pretty simple things, mm-hmm. right? Okay. So then now it's time for me to summarize. So what I just heard. Now there's a little bit of care that you need to take with the way that you phrase this, especially when there's a little heightened sense of emotion right here. We're in a little bit of a conflict and there might be some frustration or some anger or whatever, right? So what you want to avoid is saying, you just said this.
Yeah, no accusing.
Yeah, you don't say that.
No.
Right? So what you want to try to do in this, you just practice using like what I heard, or no, you don't even say what I heard, because then you'll basically put words into her mouth. So you want to say, it sounds like, or it seems like. Like those are the two things that Chris Voss uses, and it works really well. So it sounds like, or it seems like, I haven't been listening to your frustration about the bed, and it's just like it drives you nuts, and it takes you like 20 minutes to redo it, and you kind of feel like I don't listen to you about the way you want things done. And then you get a chance to say, yeah, that's how it is. Okay, so let me share how it is over here. And then I get to share. I was in the military, and when we were in the military, this is how we did it. Or whatever that story is for me, right? And I think that, we're just going to mess it up again later tonight. You're probably going to sit on it at noon. It's so like, why does it have to be so perfect, or whatever it is that I'm experiencing, right? I don't know why it's such a big deal. Like, I just think it's kind of silly that we're making a big deal out of this. Like, I get to share how I feel. Now you get to summarize. Okay, so this is like that whole taking turns thing, right? Now we understand each other. So it's really interesting that out of that understanding creates some kind of solution that either might be me saying, okay, now I understand her. I love her. So why wouldn't I just do it the way she wants? Or the opposite of that. Like, yeah, maybe I just need to ease off on this guy. He's an amazing person. He's got all these qualities that I love about him, but that's not one of them. He's not good at that, or he doesn't care, or maybe he's a little sloppy, or maybe there's a compromise. And you could do this around the toilet seat being up, and you can do this around the toothbrush thing, and like everything in your life that's kind of these silly little things that pop up in a marriage. The more you can do that in a marriage for the little things, the more you're prepared for when real conflict shows up that's meaningful, that matters. Now you've practiced and you're good at listening. And you'll know too when your spouse is like, just like that one day that when you were frustrated, what you really wanted me to do was to listen to you.
Yeah.
That's what you wanted.
For sure.
I didn't catch it. If I was listening, I could have heard the frustration, could have heard the need for a sounding board. Married to your spouse for long enough, like you'll know when that is. And it's those times when your spouse will just love you to death because you didn't try to fix anything and you stopped what you were doing and you took the time to understand them.
Well, it's like that quote about, or, just the whole thought of like, there's nothing to fix, right? And that's an interesting way to think about it too. I mean, if you kind of go into it with the mindset of like, there's nothing to fix here. Mm-hmm. For me, I have no role in this. How can I help them get to their solution in a way that's maybe meaningful to them, or in a way that they actually realize that, oh, that is the solution for them. So yeah, if I don't know what the answer is, there's no pressure on you to have any solution. It's a lot more fun. If you go in to a situation where you're always the problem solver, you go in with pressure. There's a lot of pressure. Yeah. There's a ton of pressure. Like, why do you have to have it all figured out? You don't. You show up and you're just like, sounds like you're frustrated. Like, let's dive into this a bit.
I think about, two relationships that are meaningful in most people's lives, especially if they're married and they have kids, right? It's you and your children and you and your spouse. Like, those two relationships are the most meaningful. They matter the most. Ironically, those are probably the two relationships where we show up the worst in those. Almost like we have permission. Like, you married me, you love me, so I get to treat you like crap on occasion. I get to be a jerk. And you're not going to run away.
It could be that way for people, yeah.
Yeah, but it just seems like that's probably more, it's common. Like, you do that to a new buddy, he's just not going to be your buddy more. He's out. You do that to some kid at school, he's just not your friend. Like, that's really simple, right? You do that in a work environment, those people just don't work with you no more. In those two relationships, if you can kind of drop the I want to be right, or, I want to argue with you to the degree where at least I'm not wrong. Like, if you can just drop that, put that aside, save that for when you're at dude's night with your buddies and you want to debate politics, save that for that. And in these relationships that matter, consider that what we're trying to create here is, I want them to win. Like, that's more important than anything. I want them to win. They want me to win. So this is not about me. This is about the other person, right? So I want them to win. They want me to win, or we want us to win. That's the only three outcomes that we're aiming at. There's nothing else. I don't have to be right. And I'm not afraid of being wrong. It's okay in these relationships because they matter. And then let's talk about what listening is not, what normal listening is, and then what active listening is. So what listening is not is, I can hear you, but I'm not really listening at all. These are all little statements about what it is. If you and I are talking and I'm not listening, if you asked me to repeat what you just said, I would have no idea. How many times does that happen? Yeah. It's like, oh, sorry, honey, I wasn't listening, right? So like, that's not listening. This leaves the person feeling ignored. It makes them feel unworthy. They're not worthy of your time or your listening.
And a way to fix that, I mean, if I'm not, what I like to do is like if I'm around a friend or my spouse or whatever, Kath, and we're visiting, and all of a sudden my mind just goes on like just a little journey for a minute. It's gone. Like I'm totally thinking about something. Or what I'll usually say, which kind of catches people off guard, but I've gotten used to saying it and I'm very comfortable saying it. It's just like, I just totally, when I was thinking about something else for a second, I didn't hear anything you said. Can you repeat everything you just said? Instead of like, don't worry about them being upset that you weren't listening. The acknowledgement of your being totally vacant for a minute. Yep.
And don't try to pretend like you were listening.
Right. Yeah, don't pretend. Yeah.
I mean, these people get it. They're humans too. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So that's not listening. And then there's normal listening. And this is what most people think listening is. It certainly is what I thought listening was until you kind of smacked me around that one day. I'm listening, but I'm basically assembling what I'm about to respond with. I'm building my response. So that's one statement. I'm ready to pounce as soon as I catch something that you said that's incorrect or I don't agree with. If you're wrong.
Or I take a breath.
Yeah, whatever. But it's like, if you say something that's not right, I'm going to pounce on you. Yep. Essentially, I just want you to hear my opinion and what I have to say. That's the most important thing. Even if I'm not an expert on the subject, like that's still like the most important words are the ones that come from me. I mean, come on. Everybody has that natural inclination within them or that proclivity to share their perspective, right? I'm going to prove to you that I'm right. It's another statement. I'm focusing on trying to impress you, so I'm pandering to you. Like that's another one. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not really listening to what you're saying. I'm just using it. Like this is a classic kind of younger person. Or maybe in a newer business environment, you just kind of want to make sure that they think you're cool by agreeing with them.
Totally.
Whatever it is, right?
Yep. You're nodding and going, oh yeah. And you're like, you're just trying to pretend like you're all engaged in the conversation.
You don't care at all.
You care less.
Yeah, that's right. And in that kind of environment, like neither person learns anything. Nobody gains from that conversation at all. It's just two people exchanging breath. Like throwing words back and forth, but nobody's listening to anybody.
I did that a lot growing up too. I know that I did. I was brought into my first having to listen to people outside of just a work environment and more of like a sales environment. And that was more of like a door-to-door environment where I was trying to listen, but I was being coached and I was just birthed through fire. It was a really tough thing. It was like, you're listening for a response and this is what you say. This is your answer to the objection. And so there was a lot of just like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. So happy to have let all that go. Now, it's not to say that there's not moments when we all, we do these things, right? Or this specifically, even for myself, but it's like almost never anymore. But I know that I did this before to get people to be impressed with me when I was a younger man. We all have certain ones of these, I feel like, that we maybe are more gravitated towards. That was certainly one. I wanted to be liked, as a younger kid. So
yeah, what's interesting. So I lived most of my life in this way of listening. Like that's what I thought listening was. I can look back myself and remember that those people who truly understood listening, like there's a certain thing that happens when you visit with them because they're allowing you to get past the surface. You're not just talking about the weather. You're peeling back the onion maybe a layer or two. And there's such a unusual feeling when somebody does that for you. They're allowing you to share something that's more than just what you see. It's hard to ignore that. It stands out. So you were one of the first people that consistently did that. Not a surprise. You studied it in college and you were really good at it, right? Mm-hmm. Almost like if you went to a therapist, like that's what the experience is. If you've never had somebody listen to you in that way, it's almost like, whoa, you got up to your neck really quick. You weren't used to that. Wait around and get your toes wet for a while. Like that's all you're really used to in most conversations. So let's talk about active listening, like what it really is, and then kind of the benefits or the results of that.
Perfect. Let's do that.
So active listening is I'm listening with the intent to understand you. Whatever it is that, we're talking about or what you're talking about, I want to understand you around that. I'm focused entirely on you and there's nothing else. Like this is that whole Zen thing that you talk about. Mm-hmm. This causes the person to feel understood, which is really rare for them. So that's the feeling, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. It's the feeling that people rarely get to experience. When the person feels understood, then they will share things that they never felt safe to share before. Or maybe they never had the platform. So like with my wife, I was like, wow, I married you for 23 years and I just learned that. She's like, yeah, you never took the time to listen longer than like 5 seconds. Can't get that out in 5 seconds. So she just didn't have the platform. It wasn't a lack of trust. I just didn't give her enough time.
What you miss there too, and what you're realizing is that there's such a much deeper level of intimacy that can be made when you're at, like, intimacy is the thing that a lot of people miss if they're not really engaged in listening to the other person. Like, we've all been in conversations where we have a visit with someone, like, yeah, that was fine. And then you have that conversation with someone where you're like, man, we just created something like deep. Like, that was intimate. That was an intimate conversation. Like, we went places and we talked about things that I'd normally never talk about. Or, like you said, peel back layers of the onion, as you say. So that intimacy can only be created when you're actually able to share.
What else is really cool about that, and I noticed this particularly with children, is that there's a fear of being vulnerable. You think about, they're not going to go have these conversations with their peers because they got to be cool. Like, dudes got to be cool, and like that's not a thing that you do. So you have somebody that they love you, and you feel like you trust them because they're your parents, right? They love you unconditionally. Like, you'd screw up all over the place, but they still love you and they still care. And then they won't allow you to share. Like, you have nowhere that you can get vulnerable, right? So when you're holding something in that you just kind of need to get out, or maybe you just need to explore it. Like, it's not something that will blow up if you hold it in, but it's just something that deserves to be explored, right? Whatever that is, you need to have that kind of platform. So I've noticed that kind of freedom or that trust when you listen with your children, they can get vulnerable really quick. They get comfortable with vulnerability. You think about how powerful that's going to be in their life, like even when they meet their spouse, how powerful that's going to be that they get to practice that at home in an environment where it's safe. It's really, really neat. So here's the benefits of becoming an active listener. You actually understand the other person, sometimes for the first time. So I know how that felt for me. Andrea and I were married 20 years when I started doing this. And I was kind of ashamed of myself, to be honest. How much I learned about her tells me how little I had listened for 20 years. You learn things about them that you never knew, even though you've been together for a long time. You become a rare person in the lives of those around you. So it's not just for your spouse. When you get good at active listening with your children and with your spouse, like, that shows up at work too. And it shows up in that kind of rare occasion. A lot of times there's a surprise. Like, I've had teenage friends of my kids over, and I can tell they're kind of struggling with something. And it's just like, hey, buddy, how you doing? And then that conversation takes place. And they get over something. Maybe their parents aren't listening to them, whatever that is, right? Really neat gift that you can give to people is just listening to them or doing active listening. So with children, you have a relationship that most parents never get to experience. I mean, think about, you got like 3 or 4 golden years. 14 to 18. And then most kids will want to move out. And now they're off on their own, either with a spouse or with all their buddies, or they're going to college or whatever there is. And that constant interaction with them is gone. So you got 3 or 4 golden years there that if you'll take advantage of those, that is the foundation of a relationship that every parent and every child deserves to experience that.
I think you and I have visited about this before too, but I mean, you're pretty much done raising that kid by the time they're 14. Your job is to try to raise a responsible adult. So by the time they're 14, everyone listening can think about how much really did you learn new things from your parents when you're around that age, unless it was like something vocational, right? Like a job or something you were learning to do. You really don't care that much what they're saying at that age. You're not learning new things. Like, you're practicing being the adult you're going to be. The main thing at that point, I think, from my perspective on this, is like, why wouldn't I just try to hear, like you said, and this is where the active listening is just unbelievably perfect, because they're experiencing life, they're experiencing frustrations, they've got highs, they've got lows. Who do they have to share this with who doesn't have just solutions for them? Hopefully you're that person.
Yeah. Well, think about this too. And I can go back in my own life, and we all can, right? Every set of parents is different. And I think that we all get the perfect parents for us. And maybe we were the perfect children for them, right? We all kind of learn from each other. We've heard every lecture that our parents had to give by the time we're 14. And now we're just hearing it again. It might be a different version of it, but it's essentially another, don't do this, do this. When I'm seeking something, then I need some help. Like, who am I going to go talk to? Ain't going to be my parents, because all they do is give me a dang lecture, and I'm just sick of those, right? So I'm going to go talk to somebody else's dad. Like, that's why everyone else's parents are cooler than yours. Like, that's how that shows up. But if you're able to recognize this, and I screwed it up pretty bad with my first, and we both look back and even though it was an incredibly difficult time in both of our lives.
And I don't think she would say that. You know what I mean? That's so funny. Like, cause that's your experience of it. I think she would look at it. You know, you talked about a recent, well, maybe it was Father's Day or something when she called you, and you think about her experience of that and her perspective on that. I don't think she sees it the same way.
I'm pretty sure if you interviewed her, she would say it was terrible. I'm pretty sure, because it was bad, dude. I think it was the most toxic relationship that a child and a father could have. But of course, that's my own experience. But that's what caused me. It's like, you know, when things get so bad, then you're willing to try something new. That's what caused me to try something new. And out of that, this active listening completely changed our relationship to the degree where, again, every parent deserves to have the kind of open, honest, vulnerable relationship that I have with her. So the beneficiary of this, of course, it's the two of us and my wife and her as well. But it's also every other child that we raise after that. So now we've learned, you know, when they get to be 14, it's like, okay, hey, dude, now you're practicing to be an adult. Like, I'm going to acknowledge it. Like, you're going to screw up. It's okay. You're going to make mistakes. I'm here for when you have something that you need to talk about and you want someone to listen to you. That's what I'm here for. That's what your mom's here for, right? If you need advice, sometimes we'll be appropriate people to share it. Sometimes it'll be somebody else. You choose. What occurs in that 3 or 4 year span is just incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's magic. And I think one of the big lessons there, like you said, okay, maybe that was one of the most toxic relationships that you could have ever imagined, right? Expectation wise, where you landed and what your expectations were totally different, but how fast you could remedy things.
Oh, it was like a light switch.
Unbelievable.
It was.
I mean, think about that. I mean, for the parents out there who are listening who have toxic relationships with some of their kids, you can breathe hope into that situation in a heartbeat.
It's interesting. So with children, it's different. I think that very few children get to experience having an adult that's around them all the time that takes the time to understand them, especially when they're going through puberty and there's so much new for them. They don't have context to make decisions from, like having gone through something like this in the past. It's somebody that's always there to be understanding. But with adults, it's actually kind of interesting when you consider that even though we have friendships with all these, you know, our guy friends and, you know, our couples that we hang out with and whatnot, you know, having true, authentic relationships where you feel real support from your buddies or from your friends and from other couples, it's rare. It's really rare. There's some couples that we visit with, you know, where you put them in quadrant 1, where I like both the husband and the wife, and my wife likes both the husband and the wife. It kind of goes all the way around, right? Yeah. The conversation gets past the second layer of the onion like really quick. So there's no more visiting and catching up on the weather and the shoe size of your kid. Like, it ends up being something meaningful right away, right? Those are rare relationships. Hopefully everybody gets to experience those. But
yeah, those are just super treasured. Yeah, you got to hang on, be close to those. With what you're talking about, I mean, and this whole journey that you've been on and the sharing that you have, I mean, this could really open the door for a lot of people who are struggling. Like, if you're really dealing with some stuff in your life, like Jack mentioned in the beginning, maybe it's not having the solution. Maybe it's actually go back to square one and just like go, you know what? Maybe I haven't been hearing you all along. I want to really understand this, like where does, like, just start back at the beginning. Just tell me all about this. Like, you know what? I don't think you can even just acknowledge it. I don't think I've been listening to you. Like,
well, there's some easy ways to get into this. So, like, think about this. You don't have to get deep. So if there's, you know, some people just don't like to peel open the onion really quick, right? Tell me something about your childhood that you haven't shared with me yet. Like, when you were a kid, like, what did you guys go do that was super cool or fun or whatever that you haven't shared with me yet? That whole exploration of something that simple can open the doors to be like, wow, I didn't even know that about you. What's one thing that you would love to do for fun that we haven't done or that you haven't done because of whatever reason, right? And it's not like you have to say, okay, well, now I'm going to let you have the budget to go buy that, to do that, or whatever that is when we can't afford it. But it's just about allowing them to explore so that you understand what fires them up. You don't have to get to where, hey, what are you struggling with that you haven't shared with me? Mm-hmm. That can come later. That should come later.
When there's intimacy developed,
that's
you can
right.
Get there, yeah.
So like on date night in the beginning when I was practicing this, and by the way, I still have to practice this. I gave Andrea permission that when I start going on a Jack manifesto, that you just get to smack me. So she really looks forward to it because she doesn't get to smack me very often anymore. And it's always good for me to have a little wake-up call because I can easily fall back into my habit of just going on a long-winded manifesto. initially, when we were going on our date night, it was simple as like, how was your day? Like you'd be blown away where you can go with that if you are patient with it. There had to be some point in her day, if you'll be patient with it and you'll keep digging, right? Doing the discovery, where she experienced some kind of emotion. She got really fired up about something, or she felt proud of one of the children, like they made it, whatever, right? Or she was frustrated, or she was angry or upset or whatever, right? And when you get into when you allow them to get in there and explore that, like that's when the active listening takes place, right? And there's nothing to do with it. Like it's actually really healthy to have a conversation and make somebody feel understood. Like that's all it is. Like you said, there's nothing here for me. There's nothing to solve. I'm not coming with any tools except my ears. My goal is allow this person to be understood for 5 minutes, whatever it is. It's an incredible gift.
Let's also talk about, so we're talking about the ABCs of this as well. What would be some things that in your surroundings, physical gestures, obviously you'd want, when I think about people, so we're at a restaurant, right? You and I are sitting across the table from each other and we're visiting, and to be engaged with you, you're telling me something. My eyes aren't darting all over the place. I don't have my phone in front of me on the table, with the screen up. We see that a lot, right? You go to a restaurant and you're like, oh, and I fall into that habit. I set my phone down and I'm like, you know what? If I was really wanting to be engaged with this person, I'd put my phone on silent and put it in my pocket. Because I think if you get 2 calls in a row, like if my wife really needed to call me, you call twice in a row, I think it starts ringing or something like that. Like there's that feature. But really just kind of check out from what's around you as much as possible and really just engage with that individual. I think there's a lot of other things. I mean, is there anything else you can think of that are just like ways to engage?
When we plan our quarterly retreats, we actually do some prep. So a week beforehand or a couple weeks beforehand. And this might seem silly, but it's to the degree where we've already chosen where we're going to eat breakfast at, where we're going to have these breakfast questions. We're not just winging it. We want it to be a quiet environment with very little distraction or whatever that is, right? So we've already scouted it out, or we already know where we're going to go. There's also something amazing that shows up there. When you're doing this, it's only an hour worth of conversation. But if you fail to plan, it's kind of like you plan to fail. So even around having this be a success, like there's some prep work, right? If we do it at home, which we have, make sure that you solve for the children. You want to set expectations to where they're not coming to bug you, because it'll probably upset the conversation. It will get in the way of it. Like anything that can be a distraction. If you're planning to truly sit and do a marriage retreat where active listening is important, you want to prep for all of that. Phones are off. You don't even have the phone like near you. You wouldn't want to be like, have the sports game on, watching the score or the stocks ticker or whatever. Like none of that stuff. True active listening is I'm listening to you and there's nothing else. It's that.
You are the most important person to me, and you know it.
That's right. So it doesn't mean that you can't practice active listening in environments where there is distraction. So we used to do it every Friday night on date night in the car ride between home and wherever we were going to go get tacos or whatever. Well, there's obviously going to be distractions around that. You're driving. But the whole point of it is like learn how to deal with that distraction and make them feel like they're the only person that matters right now. Like the radio's not on. You're not answering calls from your buddies or texting people, and neither of you are doing that, right? I think part of that success in a marriage retreat is to create an environment where there is no distraction, or to the degree where you can control it. And then there's times where, you take a break and distraction's fine. Nothing wrong with it. And you're going to go have some fun. And that's what it's all about. Like it's not just work. It's also enjoying each other's company, but you'll find that you enjoy their company more and more the more you do this.
Yeah. If you're gaining more and more intimacy in this relationship and you're going a little bit deeper and deeper, even when you just relax and let your hair down and you're just being yourself around them, and you're not trying to like be the therapist or the doctor or whatever with them and trying to like go deep, deep, deep. It's almost like a deposit in the relational bank account. Really, if you want to think about it that way too, every time you're really listening and you're engaging with that person, you're depositing something. You're building wealth in that relationship.
For sure.
And it's getting deep.
Yeah. When you think about like that's the case with everyone. So even like how powerful this can be in the world of sales. So if you're a salesperson, imagine what it feels like to be the customer or the potential customer or client that feels understood. Like here's my problem that I need solved, and they actually feel understood, versus another solution jammed down their throat. You might still deliver the exact same solution, but it's just in the delivery of it. First, you make or allow them to feel understood. Then you share what your solution is. Like they're open to listening. It's really interesting with children, especially teenagers. As soon as you see the lights that they feel understood, immediately they'll listen to you. Up until then, it's just another lecture. They don't want to hear it. They're totally closed. They don't want to have anything to do with it. In marriage, at least for me, that's what was going on most of the time. As soon as I tried to start sharing some kind of fix-it solution, Andrea was just like, done, not listening to this. I've heard it before, but if I allowed her to feel understood first, then she would consider something that I was saying. It's almost like, I want you to hear me, honey, but she's like, I can't hear you until you hear me first. That's how that works. So as soon as both of you have heard each other and you understand each other, then that kind of brings that to that third step, which is inviting a solution. So in most cases, like you talked earlier, you don't even have to solve it. You just say, okay, well, knowing how we both feel, what can we do to cause this to not be a problem in our life anymore? Then they'll solve it for you. And it's probably the same solution you would have jammed down their throat in the first place, which is silly, but it's hard to explain how powerful it is until you experience it yourself.
Yeah, being open to that last piece of the inviting piece, I feel like it's a huge deal. And the big thing about that, I mean, think about your outside of a relationship. Say you're in even like a sales environment, right? Or a work environment, and you invite a solution in and you have proposed some ideas, and like to be okay with whatever comes out of that. You may not be the solution to their problem. If you're a salesperson or whatever, that's totally fine. Think about how that person's going to feel because you actually heard them. You allowed them to share their suggestions. They're going to not stop talking about you and your interaction with you, even if they don't use you as their solution. They're going to tell everyone, hey, you should go and see so-and-so or talk to so-and-so because, man, the experience I had with so-and-so, like there's something there. You've talked to me about, you guys buy mobile home parks and this is your business too. And you'll have a conversation with a park owner and they're not even someone who's wanting to sell. Really, you just have a good conversation with them and you get to know them, maybe have lunch together, whatever else. And then you just you have a special way of having a conversation with someone, and then them who wasn't ready to sell their park or whatever else, they reach out to you certain time later. No one else had that experience with them. They had that experience with nobody else. And all of a sudden you're the first person on their mind.
That's just because you show up differently. Yeah. So I think that same thing. I mean, think about every relationship that you have in your life, and the further that it gets away from, your spouse and your children, and then it becomes your friends and your coworkers, and then a potential client and a stranger at the grocery store or whatever, right? Everybody that will stand out to everybody. Like this is why active listening, if you're good at it, shows up as rare in people's life. It stands out, right? To me, it's like, if you don't have anything to give, listen, it's the best gift you can give.
Yeah, that's a good line right there. I think a lot of people are scared of the unknown, right? What might come out of this listening thing and what might I hear that I'm not really excited about? This is where I think we go back to just get really excited about going fishing and not knowing what you're going to catch. Yeah. Just get real excited about it because it's all unknown. It should be for you, really. You're not going in there to try to manipulate a conversation. You're going in there to try to understand what's going on or to learn something about this person or to be able to, help somebody with something if they're really coming to you and they want to get some help, or if it's just a spouse or children or, family, whatever. Go in totally excited about not knowing anything and coming away with them saying, that's exactly what I'm feeling right now. Or yes, that's exactly it.
Well, it's not about me winning. It's about them winning. And for them, it's about me winning. Or together, it's about us winning. So you take away the whole, I got to be right. I want to avoid being wrong. I don't have to win. Then all of that other stuff just kind of naturally shows up. So even in a sales environment, when you go in with all I really want is for this person to get the solution that they need. If it's mine, we're going to discover that. If it's not mine, they're still going to win here because I'm going to share some perspective that allows them to navigate this decision with less or with more certainty or whatever that is, right? So if you think about like, who are we and why are we even here? Like this gets a little bit deeper. Like we each have unique gifts. And what we should be doing is sharing those unique gifts with that slice of humanity that's in our path, right? And if we're doing that, we're always going to be blessed with what we're supposed to get. If you have that opinion of, or that perspective of, let's just make sure that the people that are in my life win. And you could do that by just listening. Like you don't have to give them anything except for your ear, which is amazing.
Yeah, just being there for them. I don't think there's anything that being heard is probably one of the rarest things for people. So I think you really hit it. I mean, there's a reason people pay to go to a therapist, and they pay $100 an hour or more, $200, $300 an hour for like really notorious therapists, to like have this person just listen to them, reflect back what they're saying. And a good therapist will tell you, like, I don't have the answers. Like, I'm just going to guide them down the path. It's a rare gift that you can provide people. And I'm so excited that that you're such a student of this and you've become masterful at it in many ways. It's been incredible to see. And you find this as your thing to share with other people. I think it's so powerful because you come from the background of, like you said, for yourself, it was rare for you to have experienced this in your life. And now it's like, this is all you want for everyone around you. That's so cool. And it's top of mind. And the experiences that you have and with the marriage retreat and everything, it's like, what a better thing. I mean, the marriage retreat, right? I mean, how are you going to advance in your marriage if you're not listening to your spouse?
How can you help your spouse grow if you don't know what they need,
Right.
where they're stuck, right? Yeah. So we're not all given to be therapist-like, so we have to recognize that probably the last person that we should be for our spouse is their coach,
Yes.
right? We probably shouldn't be looking at that, even though some of us will try. I tried for years. It didn't work, right? I'll admit, like, even though I've had a tremendous amount of success and results from learning how to be an active listener, it's still something I have to remember to do. It's not my natural proclivity to be a listener. I have this immediate
impulse.
Yeah, like I just want to tell, right? So that's there. That's who I am. I recognize it, right? So it's something that I have to practice still. So for those of you that are listening that are like me and you're normally a talker, I think you're always going to have that. We're humans. We fall back to what we're used to doing. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you work it out, the stronger it gets. So I can get from, instead of going down the path of another manifesto, like, a few sentences in, and recognize I'm on that path of a manifesto. Like I could figure that out really quickly now, or I catch myself. And sometimes a long narrative is important and sometimes it's not. So recognizing when it's not, and that's when you need to use the two ears instead of the one mouth.
One thing that you can do, I think this was great. I mean, this whole episode's been amazing. One thing I would say too, we shouldn't be afraid to ask if somebody wants our opinion on something. If we're listening to someone and they're explaining something and it's like, we get to it and we've summarized it and it's like, people aren't going to be offended if you ask them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I could say that with my teenagers for sure. And this second teenager is now 17. So we're right there in the thick of it. So we have this discovery and I'm, listening. Then I summarize how they feel, right? Then I ask them, do you need help with this? Guess what? Usually the answer is no. I just needed someone to listen. Thanks, Dad.
Amazing. Yeah. Think about how your life would have been different too if that would have happened in your life.
Yeah, particularly when I don't know how to solve this one.
Right.
When it's like, Dad, I got this problem with boys. Like, I don't know how to solve that one. You got to ask your mom, right? But I still listen.
Yeah.
And allow them to feel understood, and then ask if they need my help. And then kind of hoping with my fingers crossed that they're going to say no, because I don't really have a solution here, right? Doesn't mean that you still couldn't be a sounding board and share how you really feel if they do need help, right? And then invite them to a solution and they'll come up with one on their own, right? Like, that's going to happen if it's necessary. But I found out that more often than not, they just want to feel understood and nobody else is hearing them. There was hundreds of times, if not thousands, with Shania, where she said, nobody understands me. Nobody gets me. She's constantly saying, Dad, nobody gets me. Well, yeah, included me. All she was really starving for was, I want to feel heard. I want to feel understood. Nobody does it for me. So think about a teenage girl, 15 years old. Every other girl that is 15 around her is struggling with the same exact thing. They're not listening to each other. They're all trying to be heard. Every one of them. Their parents aren't listening to them. They're just telling them what to do. Where else are they going to get it? From the boy. Like, that's where they're going to go, right? So, and maybe the boy has pure intentions. Probably not, because that's not what 16-year-old boys are about, right? So think about, all a 16-year-old boy has to do is pay attention and have them feel heard. And then immediately they fall in love with them, whether they are or not. They feel like they are. So as a parent, you can offer your children that kind of platform. Like, they're probably going to be less likely to fall in love with somebody just because they heard them. They're going to take their
A
time
good
and find the
lesson.
right person, right?
Really good lesson, yeah.
So there's so much of this other stuff that we don't even recognize as parents that are like ancillary to the listening, like the benefits that show up. So it's probably the same in marriages. Wouldn't surprise me that in many cases where divorce takes place or extramarital affairs take place, that the person was not feeling heard in their marriage. Probably the same thing. And if somebody will listen to them, then all of a sudden they're over there, right?
Yep.
So it's just such a powerful skill set to develop. It's probably one of the most worthy pursuits in a marriage that there is.
For sure. Yeah. This is an incredible chapter, especially that's going to be in your book. And I think that, if people, they're going to have to get on a mailing list or something, but definitely everyone's going to know when the book comes out, we're going to do bit by bit on these different chapters because these are all super meaningful. And I have such a huge interest and desire for Jack to get this book out as much as he's wanting to get it out. I'm just like, it's just so powerful. So we're going to get through this bit by bit, but this was a great talk on listening. Super, super excited for the book. Do you still have any kind of a guess as to like timeline wise? I mean,
I'm targeting having the draft done by the end of the year.
Okay.
So a little bit selfish because there's also going to be a workbook that's part of the book. So it's kind of like instruction manual, workbook that I'd like to use myself.
Yes.
So like to target end of the calendar year.
Yeah, marriage retreats. I mean, I've had a few people on the podcast already, and a couple of them I've mentioned to before, and some during. But definitely got a lot of interest where the marriage retreat goes because you know what, this stuff means a lot to everyone. Everyone has some stake in this. Everyone who's married has a stake in their marriage being as good as it could be. And a big part of it is, and something that could move the needle for everybody is actually having that intimate time together where the focus is on us understanding, growing together, learning what each other's about, and where each of us would want to go. A little bit scary for some people because if you've never done it before, you might find out that you and your spouse have been walking different directions for a long time and getting further apart. But this would be that opportunity to actually start helping each other out.
For sure.
So,
well, Peter, thank you for allowing me to share. Listening has had so much impact on my life in all the relationships that I have in my life that this is something I get pretty excited about. So thank you.
Hey, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'll put Jack Martin's email in the show notes. You guys can reach out to him with comments, questions. If you guys want to prod him, hey, when's that book coming out? Or hey, when's your first marriage retreat? I would encourage you to do that. Get on one of the first ones. That would be the way to do it. I hope you guys are all living your life at your best. If something's up for you or you guys just want to talk about something, feel free to reach out. I've got a few different things I'm doing right now. I've got the Men's Revival, which is the men's health practice, which I do men's hormones, testosterone replacement, just optimization. We use peptides, a lot of different things in our practice, and I love that practice. I also started a recent nonprofit that is very specific to foster and adoptive families, as well as veterans. So if you know military veterans out there, they always get the short end of the stick with their medical treatment. The VA is overwhelmed. And in order to give men a very thorough and comprehensive and integrative look at their health, this is something that I do in Naturopathic Consultants Nonprofit, abbreviated NCN. So I serve foster and adoptive families and military veterans, as well as pre-professional students in training. So if someone's like in medical school or chiropractic school or PT school or whatever, happy to help all them. They're all probably wanting to learn a little bit more about what naturopathic medicine is and how it can help them. And then the other group is people who have low income. Happy to help people on a sliding scale, get them the care that they need at a price that they can afford. So if any of those things speak to you or you know anybody who could use some great help, let them know to contact me at drpeter@ncnconsulting.org. And they can reach out to me on my cell phone, 602-793-8227. Best thing to do is to send me a text message and coordinate a meeting from there on, just an introductory discovery meeting so that we can kind of get the ball rolling, figure out what their needs are. You know what? If you just need some great referrals, I know so many cool people who would be happy to help you and get on your way, who'd just be perfect fits. So reach out if you have any questions. I hope you guys make it a great week and stay tuned for episode 78 of the Rise Again podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to the Rise Again podcast. Great episode, hey? You know what? I really love interviewing people, and I love getting people on who have things to share with the world. So if you have a really cool guest that you'd like to get on the podcast, email me and I will do my best to get them on the show. I hope you guys have a phenomenal week and stay tuned for the next episode of the Rise Again podcast.